Welcome back to Unboxing OD. I'm your host, Kenneth, and I'm glad that you're here. Whether you're a longtime practitioner, just stepping into this field, or somewhere in between, this podcast is a space for meaningful conversations about the heart of organizational development. We talk about what works, what doesn't, what we've learned the hard way, and what we're still figuring out. Today's episode is one that I think will resonate with a lot of you, especially those who have been brought into an organization as a consultant, a facilitator, or an internal OD partner and found yourselves facing something unspoken but incredibly powerful: the presence of power dynamics. We're going to call this episode the silent partner because sometimes the most influential voice in the room isn't the one speaking the most. It's the one shaping what gets said, what gets ignored, and what decisions are even possible. So grab that cup of coffee and let's dive in. When you walk into an OD engagement, you're often welcomed as an expert. You're told, "We need your help," or "We want your insights." But what's often left unsaid is, "We want your insights as long as they don't challenge the current power structures." This doesn't always come from malice. Often it's unconscious. Power dynamics are deeply embedded in hierarchy, history, culture, unspoken agreements, and even who physically sits where in the room. They show up in who speaks first, who speaks last, and who doesn't feel comfortable speaking at all. As OD practitioners, we observe these dynamics with care. We note whose ideas are acknowledged, whose ideas are dismissed, and how decision-making happens behind the scenes. But here's the twist. We're sometimes asked to facilitate a process that requires disrupting those systems without being given permission to name them. Think about the times you've been invited to lead a retreat, run a value session, or conduct a cultural assessment. The invitation feels open, but there are often silent constraints. Leaders want harmony. They want insight, but they don't always want disruption. They want to shift the culture, but not too much. They want honesty, but only if it doesn't implicate them. You might bring forward themes like lack of transparency or micromanagement and be met with defensiveness or spin. You might point to misalignment in structure and be told that's just how we do things. In those moments, you start to understand that you're not just navigating the task at hand. You're navigating layers of permission, perception, and protection. And those layers determine how much truth can be surfaced. Power isn't just positional, it's cultural. It exists in how organizations reward certain behaviors, who gets invited into decision-making spaces, and whose emotional labor is normalized versus whose dissent is labeled as disruptive. Sometimes it's the long-tenured employee whose opinion quietly shapes every initiative. Sometimes it's the founder whose values are embedded in the walls, even when they're no longer at the table. Sometimes it's the dominant narrative, the one everyone accepts because challenging it feels too risky. What makes this challenging for OD practitioners is that our role is inherently relational. We are asked to bring clarity, to help systems shift, but we are also navigating the very dynamics we are trying to help surface. That requires discernment, diplomacy, and a steady sense of self. So what do we do? How do we move through this work ethically without colluding with the very dynamics we hope to shift? First, we map the system, not just the org chart, but the real network. Who influences whom? What's rewarded here? Where does fear live? Where does hope live? Second, we practice power literacy. We name what we see, not always in the room, but in our notes, in our reflections, in our debriefs. And when the time is right, we gently, but directly, invite leaders to see what we see. Third, we balance humility with honesty. We ask questions like, what conversations feel off limits here? Who needs to be a part of the conversation but isn't? What would be uncomfortable to name but important to name? These aren't combative questions. They're clarifying ones. They help leaders pause, notice, and consider a perspective they may not have seen or may have been avoiding. One of our biggest contributions as OD professionals is helping organizations make space for truth without forcing it, but without avoiding it either. That might mean designing listening sessions with clear confidentiality and follow-up, coaching leaders to respond to hard truths with curiosity instead of defensiveness, encouraging peer feedback loops that decentralize power, modeling transparency in how we show up and how we communicate. When we create conditions for truth, we aren't just supporting the people in the room, we're supporting the system's capacity to evolve. Every OD practitioner faces a moment when we have to ask, do I name this now? Do I wait? Do I risk the relationship? Do I protect the project? There's no one-size-fits-all answer, but there are principles. Does naming this serve the purpose? Will it move the system forward? Can it be said in a way that invites engagement, not defensiveness? If the answer is yes, we find the courage. If the answer is no, we continue the slow work of influence, knowing that sometimes presence is more powerful than provocation. So let's take this even further. Sometimes power isn't just in the room, it is the room. It's in every interaction, every agenda item, every unwritten rule. And this is especially true in organizations where hierarchy and legacy run deep. In these environments, you may encounter people who defer to titles instead of experience, leaders who seek input but only implement their own ideas, cultures that reward agreement over inquiry, meetings where silence is mistaken for consensus. These aren't anomalies, they're design outcomes. As OD professionals, we're called to ask, what was this system built to protect? What was it built to ignore? And from there, we must ask more important questions. What could be rebuilt and how? This work calls for courage. It calls for us to name the dynamics we see not with blame, but with clarity. We say, here's what we're noticing. We offer patterns, not accusations. We create pause, not panic. Sometimes our role isn't to fix, it's to reflect. To say, this is the mirror. This is what's being reflected back. Power dynamics aren't just part of the work, they are the work. They shape how interventions land, how feedback is received, and how much transformation is truly possible. As OD practitioners, we must hold power with care. We must see it clearly, speak it wisely, and challenge it when we can. Sometimes we are the silent partner too, watching, waiting, gently shifting the room without taking center stage. That's not weakness, that's the artistry of OD. Thank you so much for spending time with me today on Unboxing OD. If this conversation stirred something in you or reminded you of a moment when power shifted the room, I'd love to hear from you. We've got several guest interviews lined up, and they bring new angles, stories, and energy to these important conversations. If you're interested in the framework I use to guide much of my consulting work, check out the Flow of 5 Tiers on our website. It explores how foundational purpose, leadership, culture, systems, and impact all interconnect. And if your organization is looking for intentional, story-driven OD support, Pearson & Pearson would be honored to support your journey. Also, coming soon is our newest course, the 21-Day Leadership Reboot, a self-paced program designed to help leaders pause, reconnect, and realign in just 15 to 20 minutes a day. And if you've been listening and thinking, I'd love to be a part of these conversations, we'd love to hear from you. Reach out to me at info@pearsonpearson.llc or send a message on LinkedIn. Until next time, keep noticing the quiet forces in your workplace, keep speaking truth with care, and keep unboxing what's possible. Take care.